Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solar Tech Talk podcast brought to you by BayWa RE, everyone's favorite U.S. solar distributor. I'm coming to you live right outside of my ordinary comfort zone. My name is Brian Church. I'm the Marketing Communications Coordinator here at BayWa RE. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. If you're tuning in again, welcome back. Of course, the Solar Tech Talk podcast brings together the brightest minds in solar and storage to discuss the most pressing topics in the industry. This episode is certainly no exception. As one of our esteemed guests put it, today we've got the band back together. So for all of you audio listeners who can't see the bright and smiling faces, I'm going to open up the floor to have our guests introduce themselves. First, I'd like to start with Chief Operating Officer of Enstall US, Corey Geiger.
Hi, good morning. Glad to be here. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I'm Corey Geiger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Enstall. Enstall is the parent company for three rather well-known brands for racking in the United States, and that would be EcoFasten Solar, Iron Ridge, and PanelClaw.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. And next we have Sales Director of C&I at Enphase, Eric Bergman.
Yeah. Really happy to be here. As you mentioned, my name's Eric Bergman. I run our commercial sales team here at Enphase. For those that are not familiar, Enphase is the predominant microinverter and energy storage supplier here in the US as well as globally, focused on a microinverter architecture and some really cool energy storage products as well as software and services. So super happy to be here. This is a great topic, very topical one, and excited to dig into it for round two.
For sure. And thank you, Eric. And lastly, we have the VP of Product Strategy here at BayWa RE, David Dunlap.
Thanks, Brian. Great to have the group together. And this is an exciting time for solar distribution and really shine a spotlight on the partnerships that we bring to our customer base and the installer base. Thought leadership is an important part of what BayWa RE Solar Systems is all about. And so getting people together to share the topics of the day, have relevant conversations, and hopefully allow our installer base to work smarter and therefore run more successful and sustainable businesses in solar.
Completely. Thank you, David. That is certainly the goal of BayWa. And thank you all again one more time for being here. I know it's a busy week within a busy quarter, and your insights and thought leadership really mean a lot to our listeners. So audience, today we are talking about domestic content once again. So the last time this group of gentlemen was in the room together, the new domestic content guidelines had just been released. That was in January of 2025. Today, it is, when you're listening to this, we'll have just passed the 90-day grace period, which means that the new domestic content guidelines are officially in place. So during this discussion, we hope to touch on, how the industry has been adapting to these new guidelines since they've been released, what's changed in the last 3 months, and what the future has been looking like. So if you haven't listened to that first episode, right now, I highly encourage you to pause this, go back, listen to Solar Tech Talk episode 25, and Eric, Corey, and David really dive into the new domestic content guidelines, really define it, really flesh out kind of everything we needed to know when they were first released. But now we're sort of reacting and looking forward. So, David, what's kind of changed over the last 3 months, and where are we headed?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, let's give a quick recap. So the May 2024 guidelines was when the safe harbor tables were first published, and we did in our conversation dig into quite a bit about what that means for the installer, and as a reminder, that safe harbor tables really allowed for approval compliance pathway for projects at scale. Right. So there remains in place today for larger utility scale projects for direct cost methodology and kind of what the original law was intended. But the safe harbor table was a pathway for more repeatability and simplicity. And so I think in addition to changes to the math and some details in the table that we'll get into, there was also some clarifications around the tech neutral and laws and the governance for solar and storage as separate facilities. So some interesting changes in the guidance that we want to get into. But I want to start with a little bit more of the high level. What do we know since Q3, Q4 timeframe, and now here we are in April of 2025? How has market demand for domestic content changed since we last talked? Eric, let's start with you.
All right, I'm first up. I'll take it. You know, I think from an Enphase perspective, folks are just becoming a lot more comfortable with some of the fine print, if you will, around domestic content and really what the opportunity is. If you and your customer and your tax attorney, tax representation feel comfortable with, taking advantage of that pretty aggressive, I would say, value add of going with a domestic content and trying to capture that domestic content bonus. So what we've seen as we turn the year, and this, of course, with some of the new changes in the safe harbor table, is people actually transacting on that for both immediate projects as well as contracted projects in the year 2025. So what we have seen at Enphase, I would say both on the residential side with TPOs as well as on the commercial side, is folks really starting to take action, trying to take advantage of the 2024 before that cliff date of 4/16. So I guess apologies for anyone who's listening to this in real time and might have missed the boat there. But my hope is that a lot of folks that took the time to really understand it, did the vetting with the appropriate bodies, included some of their tax and legal professionals, really took advantage of, at least from an inverter perspective, some of the better percentages that were applied on the 2024 safe harbor table. So yeah, I think, to wrap it up and to make it short, folks are learning more about it and getting more comfortable with it and transacting on it where it's appropriate.
That's great. Corey, what would you add, and maybe with a flavor towards, are there changes from a manufacturing decision pathway that the new guidance has encouraged as well?
So I think if I were to characterize it, I'm not sure that Eric would necessarily agree with me here, but where, when I look at the way the table changed from 2024 guidance to 2025, there were some pretty important changes. So the math equation now is a bit different. Mm-hmm. But if you are an installer or more importantly, a developer or TPO firm that likes to use MLPE, I think the story was more about consistency and continuity than it was about disruption. And on the racking side of things, it was actually pretty disruptive. The definitions around the term fastener in the 2024 guidance were pretty vague and created a pretty high level of confusion for a lot of people. And of course, even for the manufacturers. And then when the 2025 guidance came out on January 16th, there were a couple of subtle but rather noticeable changes in the definition of fasteners. For starters, now they're called structural fasteners. And secondly, the definition is concise, but also is good enough to sort of drive people toward a category of items that they may not have been thinking about under the 2024 guidance that they need to include now. And it also, by sort of elimination, it eliminated some items that we were all focusing on, primarily mounts, that we felt were part of the fastener definition under 2024 guidance. And what it has meant is where I think you have seen, to Eric's point, I think you've seen some increased momentum with people making procurement decisions, even a certain amount of safe harboring going on the inverter side. On the racking side, it's created for the first quarter of the year a lot of TPO firms sort of taking a step back and trying to understand the new guidance, what it means for their strategies for qualifying projects and qualifying portfolios, and even doing the math for their funds, and then deciding how it is they actually want to embark on a procurement strategy. So the devil is really in the details. But given that in the near term, the supply of domestic content solar cells is still fairly limited, a reliance upon some part, if not all of the racking stack, to help you clear the domestic content hurdle in at least 2025 and maybe into 2026. Racking is still going to be an important factor, and unfortunately, we do have to sort of address this complication.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit, because I last time we did talk about how because of the way that the numbers work, the math worked, you really could get compliant projects with as little as 2 SKUs, right? A microinverter and a rail, and you were above the 40%. And so now that's changed. I think the math on an MLPE rooftop, according to that table, is those same 2 components are 39.2%. Something now. Is that, yeah. So to your point, Corey, maybe we just need to kind of give a little bit of context of why did those numbers change? What's our explanation to the installer saying, why was it worth more in the old guidance and worth less now in the new guidance?
Well, let's be clear. The people we really need to ask that question of is the Department of Treasury. And, yes.
Unfair of me to put you on the spot and speaking for them. That was not my intention.
And that's understood, right? But here we are, and I'm willing to express an opinion. I have a feeling that a lot of people looking at this math are probably sort of forming their own opinions and may or may not be similar. I think first and foremost, we have to remember that the intention behind a lot of the work that's gone around the safe harbor tables has been to prioritize the repatriation of the solar module supply chain. So repatriation means coming back to the US and focus within the solar module on actually bringing the cell back. And everything else is sort of secondary to that. But if you look at the new table in particular, you can tell that once you actually have a US-made cell, and even more significantly, if you can show that you're actually making the wafer in the United States, you kind of don't need anything else to be able to clear the hurdle, even under the current intended structure, as there's supposed to be a step up in the domestic content hurdle every year, going from 40% to 55%. I'm sure David will talk about that here in a minute too. But that was the intention. You can actually still clear 55%, especially if you have a US-made wafer in your US-made cell. That kind of means that for, if I step back now to just the racking side of things, it was useful to have a table that still allowed for the math to work on clearing the domestic content hurdle in 2025 and maybe 2026 with inverters, particularly MLPE, and racking components where you get a little bit of contribution from the module, but you didn't need the cell to be made in the US to clear that hurdle. I think ultimately there was some fine tuning by Treasury to sort of, emphasize even more strongly the fact that the real goal here was to bring cells back to the United States. And I think that's why you see these not so coincidental moves where you can get MLP and rail to get you just under 40, but not quite get there. And then if you're considering a hurdle of 45%, even if you have a full stack racking and you have the full stack MLPE side, you're now at just over 44 points, but not at 45. So you still need something from the module in 2025 to clear 45%. And that wasn't by accident, clearly. And I think we'll see as time passes whether or not that's something that continues to be enforced. And I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a minute too, David.
Eric, what would you add there? I mean, I think we did talk about how, for the first time in a long time, inverters are kind of leading the bomb, if you will, in terms of the choices, both in the resi TPO space as well as potentially for the commercial space. And I think that's still true largely today. What I'm seeing, the guidance, the kind of the way I was interpreting it in the numbers, I agree with everything you said, Corey, as an opinion about the coincidence of how the math works, but it will also just kind of making the math a little bit more honest to what the system costs are. And the contribution that each of the components actually do make on average, right? There are a lot of nuances and differences across the products, but I think it's a little more accurate, if you will, to the average system. Would you agree with that, Eric?
I would. Yeah, and I would probably say I'll raise my hand and say it's my fault that those numbers were such a coincidence, because as soon as that 2024 safe harbor table came out, I of course was telling my team, and it was a really interesting opportunity that you could get that domestic content bonus credit without any contribution of a module, right? And I'm coming from the sales side here, so I'll be the first to admit I don't really think that was the intent, right, of what what was trying to be done here by Treasury and the powers that be. And I think it's good, right? As we really think about onshoring the solar supply chain, we deal in systems in our industry, right, that are made up of a lot of components, and sourcing that stuff or one of those components from outside of the U.S. does present a risk. So I think the retooling of that overall safe harbor table is a good thing for the industry, and we're already seeing that it's driving a whole lot of investment. Not only from the inverter and racking guys, but also from the module guys as well. So what Enphase is seeing in general, no matter really what those percentages really make up, is that they're going for the most amount of domestic content that they possibly can. So when some of the safe harbor tables first came out, Enphase has and still has two separate SKUs, one that is a little bit of domestic content and one that it's 100% domestic content. Every single subcomponent within the US, within that safe harbor table is a US component. And we're seeing people lean more and more into the fully domestic content just to take away as much risk as they possibly can. Pending anything changes on the safe harbor table, and just to, again, remove as much risk as possible. So yeah, we see inverters being a big part of it and continuing to be a big part of it, as well as racking and modules, which is the entire intent of the policy itself.
Yeah. So let's talk quickly about that 40% threshold you mentioned, Corey, in this updated guidance in January. That threshold for the ITC, the investment tax credit, did not change. So it is still at 40% in 2025. I think that's one of the things I'm continued to be surprised about. Not just that it isn't stepping up the way, as you mentioned, we all thought that the original IRA law was intended. The PTC has adjusted that's written into the law. And I don't want us to speculate on why Treasury hasn't updated that, but I think just clarifying that as of now, it is 40% for the ITC as a threshold. But I think what we're seeing is installers just don't believe it's going to stay there, that it is going to get adjusted. The specific language of the law will change. And so they're gunning for that. If I'm going to do a project, I'm going to specify components that get me to a 45% threshold, just to be safe, to mitigate risk. So I think I just wanted to make that statement and have you guys nod yes, that's where we're at with it. But at the end of the day, I think the broader note here is that this January guidance is still guidance. We don't have a finalization of this, the final guidance. Corey, can you speak to a little bit about where are we in that process and what do we expect to see from Treasury in terms of nailing this down, or are we just going to be in a cadence of continually updated guidance indefinitely?
So give me a second. I want to reach down here next to me and pull the crystal ball out of my bag. I think there's a couple of things to what you said, David, and I don't mean what I'm about to say to sound pedantic, but I think it's really, really important for everybody to remember that the decision makers in this process are really down to two. One is the federal government, and the other one is the taxpayer. And if you are neither of those parties, you need to be careful about making decisions for those on behalf of those two parties. And I think, we see this a lot. We get a lot of phone calls from installers, and David, what I'm picking on is you said installers. Installers, unless they're the actual taxpayer, need to be careful about putting themselves in the path of liability for telling people what the right answer is. Ultimately, this comes down to the taxpayer. The taxpayer typically is the investor or the owner of the system. On residential, that means that it's the party that's actually funding the PPA or the lease that might be eligible for domestic content. On the C&I side, it's the owner of the system. If that system's been financed through a PPA or a lease, it's the leaseholder or the PPA funder. So we need to be very clear that the rest of us need to be out of the business of giving tax and legal advice to the taxpayer who's actually going to have to foot the bill if we get it wrong. So, here endeth the editorial on that, but we really have to keep that in mind first and foremost.
Oh, I'm so glad that you went there, Corey. I was hoping you would. It's a position that I think we can't emphasize enough. And I think the installers are feeling a little bit in a bind because there's a lack of education on that tax entity around this. And so they're looking to their installer as the expert, right? You're in solar, you should know all of this. And the truth is they're in a legal and a liability box that they should not be reaching out of. And I think that is important to remind everyone. So asking for the project team to include representative tax attorneys, I think should become more the norm. Understanding who it is you're signing a contract with and where they're getting that advice, kind of maybe leveling up a little bit in our savviness as an industry in that way. To make sure we know who we're dealing with, not just taking a construction contract because it looks like revenue for our business, right? And making sure we're not signing up for things that we have legal liability for that we can't control. I think that's a super important point. From
a commercial perspective, I mean, it's something that we really hit on hard too with our installers because, to your point, installers are not tax professionals, nor do I think they would ever admit that they want to be. But a lot of the press around this has made it seem like it's, automatic no-brainer. Sure, not a problem at all. And I think it really is important for manufacturers like us to educate the installers to remove them. I mean, Corey, I love your phrasing, out of the path of liability. And what Enphase is really doing, because we deal with the installers and we have a proposal software, and what we really encourage is, as you are proposing this system and starting to put numbers, dollars and cents on a piece of paper, is to break out this line item, right? And have an asterisk, consult your tax or legal professional. Because if you deliver an end cost and you're in that path of liability and something has gone wrong, something has changed, you haven't done the required paperwork, you could, as an installer, be setting yourself up not just for a poor user experience with that one single client, but potentially an even bigger issue. So, the opportunity is definitely there, but installers do need to be very careful and don't mix that takedown of the project cost into one single number. Start breaking it out so that you can really help and walk the end customer, the tax entity, through it.
Yeah, and I think very well said, Eric. And I would imagine that you probably field a lot of this, a lot of inquiries about this. I want the installers who might be listening to this webinar to know that we actually are right there with you, feeling the pressure because that pressure does roll back to us. Everyone is looking for certainty. Everyone is looking for a guarantee. And, I guess I would say, hate the game, not the player. But we're all actually in this together, and we're very much concerned at the brands at Enstall to make sure that installers are aware of exactly what we're sitting here talking about now. Be careful about looking for an easy button here, because it could get you into trouble. Make sure you're asking questions. There are plenty of us here who live this every day with you, and we're in a position to help you some, but also help protect you as well. So, we look forward to being able to have conversations about this. No question is a dumb question in a situation like this. So just don't be shy. Give us a call.
Yeah, and I'll just double tap on what Corey has said too, where, both of our organizations are here to support you through that conversation. Basically the only thing that we cannot do is provide a piece of paper that says 100% you're going to get this tax credit. We will do pretty much everything up to there and talk with tax and legal professionals on the customer side. We have teams that can wade through this. So we're here to support the installers as much as we possibly can. We're just not the one filing the taxes. So we just can't put 100% green check mark next to some of these statements. It has to be the customer itself, the tax filing entity.
So we talked before about the level of support, what that actually looks like in the form of like reliance letters. This is what the cost act is. This is the defense of the contribution percentage of the products. That remains part of the support that you guys are both talking about, and that evidence has already been provided to all of the residential lease finance companies, is my understanding. And on the commercial side, to your point, Eric, the installer sitting in the middle there, trying to connect the dots between product and the owner and their tax filing requirements. If I hear you guys right, the questions that need to be raised is work through your manufacturer representative to connect the tax entity to the manufacturer, the right people in the manufacturer, in order to get that documentation. Is that the right way to be thinking about it? Or are we at a point where we can say Enphase and Enstall can provide a letter of assurance through BayWa to the installer to provide to their tax entity? Help us understand, help the installers understand, what does that chain of custody of documentation actually look like? And are we literally saying your guy has to call my guy in order to get this paperwork? Like, where are we with that today?
Well, maybe I'll go first because my answer might be a little bit easier and quicker.
Oh yeah.
The good thing with Enphase is we have a very specific SKU that has a very specific amount of domestic content, and SKU is the key word there. Yeah. We have a reliance letter for a commercial entity. Best practice is that reliance letter gets formatted specifically to the tax filing entity. We have a template. We've sent this template to, thousands of installers, but in terms of the sequencing, as a installer finalizes and closes a deal, the next step would be to reach out to Enphase, say, here is the tax filing entity. We format that reliance letter specific to the tax filing entity, and then sign it, and then deliver it to the installer, who delivers it to the end customer, and then they, keep that in their record. So for us, it's kind of a talk to your sales rep, get the name of the tax filing entity, and we turn it out in like 24 hours. We have an automated process that does it.
That's a great process.
Sorry, Corey.
Yeah. Speaking seriously, one of the things that's really great about the MLPE side of the equation, what Enphase has been doing, Enphase has been working on this for a long time. So Enphase has been well prepared to provide support that sort of makes this a good bit simpler for the folks the taxpayers that need to make some decisions, and from that standpoint, it's really great, especially while the industry is short on U.S. made cells. There is really the fact that Enphase has been able to streamline this the way they have, and they have a process built, I think is really great. The value of having a letter that's customized to the taxpayer, I think, is also really high. And for people who aren't in the business of building these letters, and I personally am in the business of building these letters for taxpayers when we're involved in projects, it may seem like nuance. It may seem like we're having arguments about what certain words mean, but at the end of the day, that's the game that's being played here. That's where we are with interpretation of federal guidance. As David, as you said, it is draft guidance. It is not final ruling. So we are in a area where there's a lot of gray, and because there's a lot of gray, I know if I were putting myself in a taxpayer's shoes, I would want a really nice document trail that was specific to my particular case, and I wouldn't want to be relying on some sort of boilerplate statement that I pulled down off of somebody's website as the way I was trying to justify my decisions. So I think that's even more important, by the way, on the C&I side, where the entity that could be the taxpayer, could be somebody who does a lot of these, somebody who does one of these a year. And I think it's really important to have professional advice backed up by documentation that is specific to your case. And so I think the Enphase process is a great process to go through. We have something similar for the Enstall brands. Unfortunately, it gets a little bit more complex because the definitions around the MPCs on the table for racking leave a lot to be desired in terms of providing clarity and certainty. And at the end of the day, in many cases, the decision to classify certain solutions on the racking side to qualify for the domestic content bonus credit using the safe harbor tables comes down to a taxpayer's willingness to accept a certain level of risk that the rules might apply differently than the way that they think they have. And that's why we encourage people to seek the advice of a tax professional to help them make a final decision on this. We are accustomed at the Enstall family of companies to supporting these professional tax counsels in providing them with information under non-disclosure with regard to the way we manufacture things, the way the supply chain is organized, the origin of our materials, quite a bit of information that we would not be comfortable sharing in the public domain, but we would be comfortable sharing with a tax advisor under a non-disclosure agreement. And that helps in many cases to give the taxpayer some confidence that the decisions that they're coming to are going to stand up to a scrutiny later on, if in the event that the IRS comes knocking and wants to see some paperwork. So it does tend to be a customized activity, and that's why, if you remember, call us, don't be shy. I think that's really important. If you don't even know where you could go to get some of this tax advice, there are some people that we have worked with already on quite a few projects over the last couple of years that we could certainly point you to get you started. And if you have your own tax counsel and you want to get them involved, we'd be happy to work with your tax counsel as well.
That's excellent. So I want to clarify just everything that you just said, Corey, is really pretty specific to the commercial domain. But there's a thread there that you guys both mentioned around at the SKU level. So once we've got comfort with you as the manufacturer know these are the products that we are manufacturing domestically, these are the items and the SKU identifiers, right? The unique item names of these products. We can create a parts list. We can take a project overall bill of materials and have those conversations, tax entity to tax attorney counsel, and with the guidance that the manufacturer can provide, it is feasible for an installer to gain a level of comfort around a parts list and then say, these are the items that I'm going to use on my next project because I've been down that road and I know that these are the right ones, and I'm going to stop shopping around and stop trying to invent this every time. So that being able to do this repeatably and at scale is possible. It's kind of just getting over that hurdle of the first one, right? And I think what you guys are really pointing towards is, as an industry, we need to help focus our attention on these are the parts, these are the items. There is defense, there is documentation. We need to connect to the right people to that actually need to have that documentation. We need to have them accept the right risk and liability. But upon doing that, now we have a parts list that we can say, now when I go to my next customer, my next owner, I've got my answer, and I shouldn't be starting over from scratch, right? Unless, of course, the project parameters change, and that could be a reason to look at something else. But the reason I'm kind of pointing that out on the commercial side is I think that's been the barrier for commercial is I don't know where to start. I don't know which parts to choose. There are too many options. I'm confused. But then if we say that there is a path there where we've got a repeatable, this is the parts list I should be designing with this job after job, that's actually what is happening on the resi side, right? The finance companies have done all of this due diligence, and they've worked with you all on the parts list for manufacturing, and that's what they've put into their AVL. So in thinking about the installer staying in their path, it is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it should be as simple as I'm going to sell this financial package in the resi space. These are the products that third-party financier has put on their approved list to work with. And I don't need to be concerned about the percent contribution that each one is providing. That's not my job. My job is to install the parts list as they've defined it under that lease. And so maybe you guys can share a little bit with our listening audience about where are we at with those finance companies rolling out these new domestic lease packages and the AVLs.
You go first, Eric. Yours is going to be a lot simpler than mine.
Yeah. I'm getting all the softballs here. I'll take it. I mean, keep it in mind that I manage our commercial business, a little less, connected to our TPOs, but it's pretty simple for Enphase. All the TPOs have updated their AVLs to include the SKU that they would like to specify based on the matrix that they are constructing of component level to get to their domestic content that each would like to do. So from a residential perspective, it's basically, as you said, David, taking a look at the AVL and pulling the SKU off of Enphase and installing it. From a commercial perspective, before I hand the mic to Corey, I'll give the call out to BayWa. I mean, that's really where we have seen a lot of great partnership with BayWa, where the BayWa rep on a commercial side has this big menu of different components that have different domestic content percentages based on, the cost that you're trying to deliver that project for, and based on the percentage that you're trying to get to. BayWa has done just a really good job, I think, both with their reps as well as on your web portal of showing what that overall domestic content is in real time. And it's basically, picking the menu based on your risk tolerance and the price that you're trying to get to. So that's it from the Enphase perspective for TPO and commercial.
Yeah, it's great. And, I'm about to say a lot, so let me start with the simple. I think even for the racking side, and now I'm talking about residential. On the commercial side, the complication comes in because ballasted systems, for example, are actually not addressed in either the 24 or the 25 guidance. So you're now in this spot where you got to decide as a taxpayer, do you want to take a tax credit where you are using contributions from the rail and the fastener MPCs on the safe harbor table on the racking side to add, to contribute points. That's a conversation. That is not a hand me the document and let me run with it. thing, and that's simply because the guidance isn't there to make that watertight. So, moving over to residential, David, you set it up really well, but I can tell you this, even though it is kind of the 80-20 rule where the list of SKUs is pretty common across the TPOs, I'll tell you that not two TPOs actually implement this the same way on racking. Each one of them does it differently. And I'll give some examples without naming names. We've got a particular TPO that won't provide a SKU list, but they will include a supplier and maybe a platform on their AVL, but the installer is left to work with the equipment supplier to make sure that the bill of materials on the racking side is sufficient, right? Then we have on the other end of the spectrum, we've got a TPO firm that will not accept any documentation to put a particular product on the racking side on their AVL unless they have an opinion letter from a legal firm that specializes in tax and in tax credits. And so if you take those two as the ends of the spectrum, everybody else is somewhere in between. And we've got because of the interpretation on the rules on even the 2025 guidance is not exactly airtight. We've got one TPO firm that takes a particular SKU and calls it a rail MPC, and another TPO firm that takes that same SKU and calls it a structural fastener MPC. And at the end of the day, we don't make that call. It is the taxpayer that makes a call. And that means that CPO has spent lots of time and money trying to work with a professional advisory firm who advises the funders of that TPO on what they're going to take and what they're not going to take. That's why this has taken so long on the racking side to actually adapt to the 2025 guidance. We are just now starting to see AVLs come out for the 2025 guidance because they've spent the last 3 months really working hard on trying to answer these questions and come to some decisions. To make it worse, if a project has been safe harbored under the 2024 guidance, the racking rules are different because attachments ended up getting included in most TPO's interpretations of what the term fastener meant on the MPC. So that's its own ball of wax. And I won't go into any more details on that, but I think people are probably going to get a flavor here of the fact that once you've got your relationship with a particular TPO set up on the resi side, sure, it's rinse and repeat, but you move TPOs, you better ask those questions again because the rules are probably a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to put a point on that these decisions are being made at the tax liability entity level, right? And I think that's hard to see sometimes when we're in the thick of this, and from the installer's vantage point, it seems easy to say, well, this is a federal guidance and the manufacturers just need to comply and they need to make these decisions. Well, no, the whole point of this is who is taking the liability, who's taking the risk. That's the tax entity. And the TPOs are not all lining up for the same thing because they have a different level of that risk tolerance as well as different nuances of that advice, right? Yeah. And so at the end of the day, those are the choices they're making. And again, the installer's requirement here is to follow what that finance company's directives are, as clear or as vague as they may be. That's their job, not to make these fundamental decisions about where to put risk or where to define a product.
Yep. Yeah. And that extends, by the way, David, to the verification steps that different TPOs require. Some are requiring specific photos to be taken on site so that they can validate that the racking that was put on has the physical markings that correspond to what the supplier has identified as the markings that differentiate a domestic content product from an imported product. And again, the rigor on that depends upon the TPO you're talking to. So it's not as simple as getting a SKU. There could be inspection-related requirements that come with working with a particular TPO and earning the incentives that they might be offering to installers who elect to include domestic content racking products.
Yeah, and I hope that clarity is being provided from the TPOs. I know there's a lot of emphasis just kind of on working through the sales platform and getting originations out there, but I do believe that the support and the clarification about those requirements is being worked through, and the installer should be demanding it of those partners before they take on the obligation of selling those products. So I guess we'll see. And I think it's interesting to note too that the big shift here is that the first one out of the gate last year was Sonova. That took a path that none of the other current AVLs are taking with regard to domestic content, which is we're going to make it a requirement. It's the only option. I think every other AVL, every other TPO now is saying, here's a lease product that can be a non-domestic product equipment BOM package or a domestic package, and then they're incentivizing based on the cost or the kickbacks, I guess, or the incentives that they're putting into it in order to encourage installers to go one way or another. And rather than I guess a mandate sort of a choice. So yeah, good call out reminder for the installers to choose their partners wisely, do your due diligence, and stay in your lane. Is probably where we end on that one. I have a big one for the last question, but before I go there, I think just generally, how do we feel about the current supply chain for domestic content manufacturing? And from the vantage point of manufacturers, what can you share with our listeners in terms of insights of, are we ready for this? Are we prepared with enough supply to meet the demand for domestic content products outside of the topic of the week, which as we're recording this is my big gotcha here around tariffs. But before we go to tariffs, just from a demand standpoint, are manufacturers seeing the demand signals clearly, do you think, from the channel in terms of knowing how much product you need to produce? And are we prepared as an industry with the capacities to produce for that demand?
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, you're asking the sales guy. Yeah, of course. We can.
Of course we do. We can build anything.
No. In all seriousness, I mean, from an Enphase perspective, we've been preparing for this for 2 or 3 years, right? We've been establishing U.S. Manufacturing facilities that are both up and running in South Carolina and in Texas. Those have been running and delivering domestic content product for a couple years at this point. We've been delivering some of our first 100% domestic content microinverters, from last year, Q4 of last year. And, we have really, I give a lot of credit to our leadership, where they kind of saw where the puck was going. And, like I said, established those US-based manufacturing, but also took a look at our supply chain to make sure that we were doing a good job of diversifying some of those sub-suppliers, both from an OEM perspective, but also from a regional perspective. I mean, protect against things like potential tariff risk, but also just to remove a lot of the risk. In terms of our capacity, both of those manufacturing facilities that are in the US are not even operating at full capacity. We've had some folks that have come to our Texas facility, for instance, and there's a big corner of that facility that's sitting absolutely dormant at this point. And we're starting to think about, after getting some of these demand signals from the market, it's very easy for us to ramp up that capacity and add in additional lines to supply it. And the best part about having US-based manufacturing is that we can ramp that stuff up quick, and the lead times into distribution channel are pretty short. So my team specifically runs like a 6-quarter rolling forecast. So those are really, we're talking with installers, we're talking with developers, we're talking with EPCs, we're talking with various market leaders and policy folks to really understand, what the demand is looking like 6 quarters out. And then we send those demand signals to our production side, and they tell us, keep it coming. So from an Enphase perspective, we feel pretty well protected, pretty well insulated. Diverse supply chain and U.S. manufacturing is going to allow us to really capture the increased demand that we're expecting.
That's great. Yeah, and I think on the racking side, let's separate this into an answer on supply and an answer on demand. So the supply one first, because it's easier. We not only are we ready, but we also have plenty of capacity, and we're essentially waiting for the demand to happen. And the reason the demand on the racking side is not looking the same as the demand on the MLPE side is because the racking definitions have been really confusing. And of course, we had the big switch that we were talking about earlier in this conversation in terms of the definition of fasteners. But we have been building capacity. We are essentially believing that as funds make their final decisions and they communicate those decisions out to installers, which is happening now as we speak, then the demand is going to start picking up on the racking side. And so I believe that the pause that we've seen in the residential side of our business for domestic content has everything to do with the fact that the definitions changed in January, and funders have had to sort of recalculate, recalibrate, rebuild their confidence around what they want to do on the racking side. On the C&I side, it's just the opposite. People have actually been accelerating their deployments and their purchases this year. And, I don't care to speculate on motivations of different owners and developers, but we're actually seeing uptick in demand earlier in the year than we would normally see. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that in 2024, with the first release in May of the first safe harbor table, a lot of people did a lot of math back then and entered 2025 with plans that, even though the definitions changed on racking, they were able to make decisions faster for their particular projects or project portfolios and have been aggressive in making sure that they could get access to product. So it's been a different sort of demand curve on the C&I side, and we're seeing significant traction on domestic content products on C&I projects. So my advice to an installer who's looking at needing domestic contact racking for their C&I project, they should give us a call sooner than later, because we want to make sure that even though we have plenty of capacity, you're going to want to make sure that we're aware that you're coming, and so that we can prepare for you properly.
Yeah, that's perfectly well said, Corey. And I think that's where BayWa wants to be part of that conversation and help. Obviously, the distribution channel serves immense value in kind of smoothing out that supply requirement, but we have to do it with demand visibility. So it's great when we can align on these are the things to focus on. These are the products that we know you're designing with, and roughly when you're going to need them, then we can make those purchases in advance on your behalf and have them ready to go. If we just have no visibility, right, you're talking directly with the manufacturer, but we don't know how you're going to source the product, then that's when you get into a bind. Absolutely. So I kind of teased on the tariffs. I don't really want to go there. I think it is a hot topic, but the news is changing daily. And I think all that we would really be doing is speculating. And that's not really our best value, I think, to our listeners. But I do think it's fair to say that our industry needs to prepare and plan for disruption and some price increases. There are some tariffs that have already gone into place around steel and aluminum, and that impacts obviously racking costs. We know there is going to be some upwards price pressure this year. And I think my advice to our listeners, and I'm curious, Eric and Corey, if you just sort of pile on with your advice, is don't allow this to distract your core business. Understand what rising prices means for your business and how you're going to incorporate them into your contracts. Deal with it in a proactive manner rather than thinking it's something that you can and should avoid. I think the disruption that we cause in our businesses to chase, this thing hasn't changed in price yet, so I'm going to move my whole business model over to a different product line. To me, that's more disruptive than just I'm now paying a slightly higher price, and I've got a mechanism for passing it on to my customer. I've got a price model that works. So I think as a collective, I'd like to see us remain calm in this uncertainty because we can't predict. And if we play the short-term game, I think we're going to end up spinning out and maybe net. Didn't actually get anywhere ahead in the end game, in the longer game, rather than stay the course, lean into the partnerships we have, do what we do best, which is sell and install solar. So Eric, Corey, anything to add on that point?
That was perfect. I'm not going to get myself into trouble. I mean, I think you're right. And I think the real takeaway there is stay the course and don't make any rash decisions around your business, the products that you've really established your business on, the vendors you're familiar with dealing with, and the support that you get. I think, from my perspective, what we really see with the tariff part is, it's obviously a very public thing. Right. And I think that sets expectations a little bit with the customer about what could or could not come. I think it's important to incorporate into the sales process that every single component in power electronics, energy, I mean, across the board, is going through changes in tariff or no changes. I mean, I'm not going to go into the political tailspin, but who knows? I think it's just important to set the expectations early on in the sales process that we are in a unique environment right now. And from a vendor perspective, I mean, what I can tell you, Enphase, it's almost the exact same answer to the previous question, right? We've kind of seen this coming. We've been diversifying our supply chains. We've been onshoring our manufacturing, and at least at this point, Enphase is ready to kind of absorb any kind of price increase as related to tariffs, but that's all that we really want to say right now.
Perfect.
Well done, Eric. Well done. Eric's lucky he's a sales guy, so he gets to talk about price. I'm even luckier because I'm responsible for supply chain, and so I'm not allowed to talk about price. My responsibilities, and I have an incredible team that is working, no kidding, around the clock, 7 days a week, making sure that we achieve what, as supply chain folks, we are chartered to achieve, and that really comes down to four main things, right? We're about continuity of supply. We're about controlling cost. We're about making sure we have the right capacity, and we're also about making sure that we have, to a point Eric just made, resiliency in our supply chain, so that as the externalities of our business, whether it be government regulation, whether it be price of commodities, whether it be inflation, at the end of the day, we need to be making sure that we're focusing our efforts on optimizing those four main factors that I just listed. But David, you said something really important that I'd like to finish on, and that is, now is not a time to panic. In chaos lies opportunity. And if you're keeping a cool head, if you have gone to the trouble in good times to invest in partnerships, whether it be with a company like BayWa, who's in a position to help you absorb some of these shocks and provide you with some level of reliance and cost control as well, or you're working with the manufacturers, where in partnership with a company like BayWa, we're in a position to help navigate rough waters together. You get to rely on these partnerships when they really matter, which is when times are bad. And that's why we're here. That's why we got together on this call today. But know that especially, I'll speak for the Enstall family of companies. We enjoy an incredibly good relationship with BayWa. Lots of open communication, lots of scenario planning, lots of contingency planning, and we focus on staying calm and not letting the emotion and the volatility of the moment drive highly tactical, ephemeral decision making. So, we focus on having steady hands at the till, and we look forward to being able to support you in making sure that you keep your business running well while these waters are choppy.
Extremely well said. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So much gratitude. Really enjoyed the discussion, the conversation today, gentlemen. As always, listeners, please lean into these partnerships, trust in your existing partners, strengthen them. This is a time of resilience and opportunity, as Corey so eloquently said. And hopefully we've dispelled some confusion or myths about this ever-changing topic on domestic content, but we really appreciate the time and the discussion. Thank you so much.
Completely.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, David, for moderating the conversation. Thank you, Eric, Corey, for your amazing insights, adding some color to all these gray areas, and just reaffirming that we're all in this together, from the supply to the manufacturing to the distribution. We're here to weather the storm and build long-term success. So this has been the Solar Tech Talk podcast, and thank you for listening.